Okay, so the main focus of this is starting off with the formation of the AFL, which is the American Football League. Um, Going back a little bit, kind of some background information. The NFL technically forms, I believe, in 1922 from the AFPA to the NFL, and it had several rival leagues throughout its history. The one that was most probably pivotal was the AAFC that was formed in 1946. When I mean pivotal is that it brought three teams from that league over to the NFL. So the Baltimore Colts, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Cleveland Browns were all part of the AAFC. And when the AAFC ran into financial problems, those three franchises were solid enough where they were accepted into the NFL. And the NFL pretty much stayed in that manner until 1960. And it's at this point that a group of businessmen who saw the success of the NFL, and the greatest game ever played in 1958, and so they had a group of businessmen who wanted to join in. Lamar Hunt being one of them, and the NFL denied them the ability to purchase a franchise and join the league during that time period. And it's the same thing today. If you want to join the NFL as a new franchise, you have to get, I believe it's like 3/4 of the votes of all the teams, and they didn't get that. So they were denied the opportunity to join the league. So Lamar Hunt, tried to, drum up other people that he knew wanted to have franchises in the NFL as well. And they were able to get a handful of teams put together. Many of these teams or all of these teams are now in the NFL. So you can see the teams there in the image there, the Buffalo Bills. This is the Houston Oilers, who are now the Tennessee Titans, the New York Jets, the Bengals, the Chargers, the Raiders, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Broncos, the Dolphins, the Boston Patriots, who are obviously now the New England Patriots, formed a new league, what was referred to as the American Football League. So you had the NFL and the AFL as separate leagues that played separate schedules. They didn't play each other originally. And that happened, that was the thing throughout the 1960s, 61, early 60s, all the way into the mid 60s. And the AFL played a little different style than the NFL did. The AFL played a more wide open style, like they threw the ball a lot more. They were much more willing to draft and sign Black players. A lot of them from historically Black colleges like Jackson State, Tennessee State, North Texas, Grambling, those types of schools. That those players typically didn't get a real good chance to make it in the NFL, but the AFL gave them the opportunity. The Dallas franchise was originally called Dallas Texans. They moved to Kansas City, became the Kansas City Chiefs. And then Miami was added in 1965. So the original 8 teams were Los Angeles Chargers, the Dallas Texans, who again later became the Kansas City Chiefs, New York Jets, who were originally called the New York Titans, Buffalo Bills, the Boston Patriots, the Denver Broncos, the Oakland Raiders, who are now the Los Angeles Raiders, and then became the Las Vegas Raiders. And then Houston, the Oilers, again, as I mentioned, who are now the Tennessee Titans. Those were the original 8 AFL teams. And like I said, Miami was added in 1965. Now, the NFL added some teams as well during that same time frame. They added the Minnesota Vikings in 1960, and I believe the Dallas Cowboys also in 1960 joined the NFL as well. And then the last AFL team, I believe, the last AFL team that joined was the Cincinnati Bengals in 1968. So that gives you, you know, a lot of teams here, moving there, whatever. Anyways, those guys were called the Foolish Club. They were foolish to think that they could survive and have a league that was successful. AFL Innovations, they put the names on the jerseys, on the back of their jerseys, which was a new thing. The NFL did not do that. They used a scoreboard that was displayed on the field, you know, and had the clock on it, had the score on it. They offered a 2-point conversion. And as I mentioned before, they recruited a bunch of African-American players, you know, to play in their league for an assortment of reasons. First of all, they needed players. And secondly, it gave African-American players an option to play, you know, in the AFL, where they didn't really get that option in the NFL. They played a lot more wide open style. They threw the ball a lot more. They didn't hand the ball off in first, second, and third down and punted. They would throw it long. They would throw it a lot. It was a lot more entertaining to watch in the eyes of spectators. 1965 is considered a very pivotal year for the AFL because they did a couple things. Number one, they drafted. I should say, let me back up. They signed a TV deal with NBC worth $36 million that was going to last until 1970, I believe, which was significant because now they had an avenue. You know, CBS was doing the NFL, NBC was doing the AFL. In addition to that, they drafted Joe Namath from Alabama and gave him at that time, a record contract of $427,000 a year to play for the Jets. And so what that created was a bidding war between the AFL and the NFL over players coming out of college, which was going to drive salaries up. You know, I mean, obviously that would, you know, the competition, right? And the NFL got a little bit leery of the fact that, you know, if we want to get the best players, we're going to have to get in a bidding war with the AFL to get the best players. And the AFL just signed a $36 million TV deal. So the AFL has money. And so that kind of really precipitated the beginnings of the two leagues talking about merging into one. Because the NFL saw that they weren't going to be able to, you know, it was going to be to their detriment to try and outbid the AFL. They could probably do it, but it would mean the owners are going to end up making less money. So that was a huge. That's why 65 is an important year in terms of the AFL, anyways. As I mentioned, Lamar Hunt, founder of the American Football League in 1960. His family, his sons, I believe, are the current owners of the Kansas City Chiefs to this day. As I mentioned, his franchise originally was called the Dallas Texans. And when the Dallas Cowboys entered the NFL, Lamar Hunt says, well, we can't have two professional sports teams in the same city. Not yet, anyways, not in Dallas. And so he moved it to Kansas City. And that became one of the original AFL franchises. He also was credited with coming up with the name Super Bowl. You know, and before that, it was a really long, like the AFL, NFL championship game or something that was really wordy. And he didn't like that. And so, you know, eventually by the mid 60s, the winner of the AFL and the winner of the NFL played in what eventually becomes a Super Bowl, but it wasn't originally called that. But he came up with that name. He thought, let's shorten this up. It's too long. So they came up with Super Bowl, you know, just something that he came up with. Pete Rozelle is a significant individual in this group as well. He was at one time the general manager of the Los Angeles Rams. And by the way, the Los Angeles Rams originated as the Cleveland Rams. They moved to Los Angeles in the 1950s, I believe, maybe the 40s. Named commissioner of the NFL in January of 1960. He was the first real innovator in the NFL and specific to two major things. Number one, the merger, where the AFL and the NFL merged together, became one. That was number one. Number two was his ability to market the NFL and negotiate huge TV contracts with CBS and NBC, and then later on ABC for Monday Night Football. At the time, in 1960, there was 12 teams in the NFL. Of course, you had the AFL had 10, I believe. And they were all worth about $1 million per franchise. When he left in 1989, so you're looking at almost 30 years later, there were 28 teams, so they added 6 teams, and each one of them was worth at least $100 million. So you can do the math, and you're talking about worth of 1 million to 100 million. That's pretty significant over about a 30-year period. So he was probably the most innovative individual in the NFL, and you could argue one of the most innovative people in professional sports, in the modern era, 1960 and beyond. Some of Rozel's greatest accomplishments, as I talked about, he negotiated the merger between the AFL and the NFL. So they merged into one league. That one league was still going to be called the NFL, but the AFL teams were going to join the NFL. And we'll get into that a little bit more detail in a second. It was negotiated in 1966. They agreed to do it, but they had a actual date of 1970 because of that TV deal that NBC had signed with the AFL that same year. So NBC wanted to make sure that they had their TV deal intact. So the merger was agreed that we're going to merge, but we're not going to do it till 1970. When that happens, we're going to negotiate new TV deals. Congress, as any antitrust type of situation, Congress passed the bill, and it gave the NFL exemption from antitrust action. So in other words, they didn't consider themselves to be a monopoly, even though it was the only professional football team available, which technically is a monopoly. But because of the situation, you don't have tons of NFL players running around, Congress allowed that monopoly to exist. In addition to the merger, he ushered in a couple things. The Super Bowl, number one. He also negotiated huge TV deals with CBS and NBC. And then in 1970 or 1971, I believe, he instituted Monday Night Football the way it is today, which obviously is the precursor to Thursday Night Football and Sunday Night Football and all the other different like primetime games that are out there, which is a huge part of the NFL today. He had legal battles with Al Davis, which we'll get into in a little bit. He also had legal battles with the USFL, which is another rival league that doesn't come into play until 1983. And he also had legal battles with the NFL Players Association. There were strikes in 1982 and in 87, and there was the ongoing struggle between Rozelle and the Players Union over free agency. And again, we'll get into that more specifically in other lectures. Going back to the merger, in June 8th of 1966, the NFL AFL negotiated the deal that would merge the two leagues into one. Due to separate TV contracts, the actual merger, as I mentioned, took place in 1970. 10 of the AFL teams would be absorbed by the NFL and become the AFC. However, three NFL teams to balance out the two leagues had to move from the NFL from the NFC to the AFC. That was Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Cleveland. Those three teams were part of the NFL originally, but when the merger took place, they were moved over into the AFC to balance off the teams. So there was 26 teams, 13 in the AFC, 13 in the NFC. The precursor to the Super Bowl was, as I mentioned, was called the AFL NFL World Championship game. Again, very wordy. That's why they moved it to Super Bowl. It didn't happen until the third time. There were 4 championship games that pitted the NFL champion against the AFL champion. These games were played before the 1970 merger. No Super Bowl at this point. The first two were not yet referred to as the Super Bowl. The first two was Green Bay. They won both of those under Vince Lombardi, the famous coach, the Lombardi Trophy that the NFL gives out to Super Bowl champs, obviously named after him. In the first one, they beat the Kansas City Chiefs in 1967. And then in 1968, they defeated the Oakland Raiders in both the first two championship games played between the AFL and the NFL. Again, not called the Super Bowl yet. So that's what the new playoff system looked like when it originally formed. You can see the AFC and the NFC are here, and there was a wild card in both. That's the first time they added the wild card. So you had 3 divisions in each league, and then the wild card. So the wild card in the AFC was the Miami Dolphins, I believe, and the wild card in the NFC was the Detroit Lions. So these are the 3 conference champions. So San Francisco was number 1. And the number 1 seed, they had the best record. And then over here, you had Baltimore had the best record. And a little note here, Dallas beat Detroit 5-0 in the playoff game. It was a famous score, 5-0 in the playoffs.